The war didn't end. The welcome did. 80,000 people. That is how many Ukrainian men, women, and children are living in Ireland right now. People who fled a war that has not ended, who settled into schools and workplaces and communities across this island, and who woke up this spring to find that the Irish state is preparing to walk out of the room. The monthly payment that kept a roof over their heads is being cut, then phased out entirely. The hotel contracts that housed 19,200 of them are being terminated, handed back to the tourism sector. And the government is now, quietly, drawing up a scheme to pay families up to €10,000 to leave. That is the story on paper. But here is the part that changes it. There are fewer than 2,000 rental homes available anywhere in this country right now. Not in Dublin, not in Cork, across the entire state. Fewer than 2,000 listings for a population of over 5 million people, in a market where the average monthly rent for a two-bedroom apartment has already passed €2,000. The state is preparing to move 80,000 people off its books, and into a market that cannot house them. Here is the open question nobody in Leinster House is asking aloud. Where precisely do they go? Before we go any further, drop a quick line in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from, and whether you have a full quarter hour or just a coffee break. I want to know if this channel is reaching people inside Ireland, in the Ukrainian community here, or somewhere else entirely. It matters to how I frame the rest of this. Now, back to the numbers, because they do not get easier from here. The Irish Refugee Council is not a fringe advocacy group. It is one of the oldest and most credible refugee support organizations in the state. When it says that the government's wind-down plan is creating homelessness risk at scale, that is not protest language. That is a professional assessment. The council has been fielding calls from Ukrainian families who have already been asked to vacate hotel accommodation. Not because the war is over, not because they have somewhere better to go, but because the contract between that hotel and the Department of Justice, Home Affairs, and Migration has expired and will not be renewed. The Immigrant Council of Ireland issued a direct warning. Without clear eligibility criteria, free legal advice, and an appeals mechanism built into any transition plan before the supports are cut, families would be left facing homelessness before repatriation logistics are in place. That statement was made weeks ago. The public consultation on those safeguards is not expected to open until May. The cuts are already underway. Minister of State Colm Brophy has been unusually direct for a government minister. He has said, publicly, that the state wants to terminate all accommodation contracts within a year. He has described the situation plainly. No other European Union state is providing this level of support to Ukrainians, and Ireland cannot continue indefinitely. That framing is not dishonest. It is also not complete, and this is precisely the detail that changes everything. Ireland spent €3.4 billion housing Ukrainian refugees since the 24th of February, 2022. That is not money that went directly to Ukrainian families. Most of it moved through hotel contracts, guesthouse agreements, and the Accommodation Recognition Payment, a scheme under which Irish hosts received between €400 and €800 per month per property to open a room or a second home. 23,500 properties. 42,000 people housed, at a monthly cost of €14.5 million. The state was not running a welfare program. It was running a contracting operation, and the primary beneficiaries, financially, were Irish property owners and Irish hospitality businesses. Now those contracts are ending. The hotels are going back to tourism. The hosts, whose payment is being cut from €600 to €400 before being eliminated, are beginning to ask people to leave. And the people leaving have nowhere in the rental market to land. Everything we have just covered, the payment cuts, the contract terminations, the return scheme, that is the administrative surface of this story. The real question sits underneath it, and it concerns both communities simultaneously. Irish renters and Ukrainian families are now competing for the same impossible market. That is not a coincidence. That is the structural consequence of a housing policy that never built enough homes, and a refugee response that was designed to be temporary in a crisis that turned out not to be. Here is what an actual housing analyst looking at this file would see. The daft.ie rental report, published earlier this year, found that on the 1st of February, 2026, just days before new rent control measures came into force, fewer than 1,800 homes were listed for rent across the entire country. That is a 22% drop from the same date in 2025. It is the lowest February figure ever recorded. Rents have risen in 13 of the past 14 years. The average monthly rent nationwide stands above €2,000. In Dublin, Cork, and Galway, more than 60% of available rental properties are priced above €2,000 per month. Into this market, the government now intends to redirect roughly 80,000 people who have been living in state-supported accommodation. The pain is exact. The problem: 80,000 people needing private accommodation. The intensification: the market has fewer than 2,000 listings. The solution that the government is offering: a voluntary return scheme paying €2,500 per person or €10,000 per family to go back to Ukraine. A country where, as of this spring, the war continues and conditions remain uncertain. If this kind of structural breakdown, the kind that sits underneath the headlines, is what has been missing from your feed, you know what to do. Now, back to the mechanism, because the €10,000 figure deserves more scrutiny than it has received. The voluntary return scheme being drawn up in government is described as generous. In the context of what it is being offered instead of, that description requires examination. €10,000 per family sounds substantial. Against the cost of relocating a family to a country in active conflict, with no guarantee of safe or stable conditions on arrival, the calculus shifts considerably. The scheme is not being designed to return people to safety. It is being designed to reduce the numbers on the state's accommodation books before the EU Temporary Protection Directive expires in March 2027, which is technically a policy decision, which is technically the problem. The directive, the legal framework that gives Ukrainians the right to live and work in Ireland, runs until March 2027. The accommodation support is being withdrawn well before that date. That gap is not accidental. The government's intention, explicitly stated by Minister Brophy, is to move Ukrainians off direct state support and into either the private rental market or voluntary return, while their legal right to remain in Ireland is still in place. The legal right and the practical ability to exercise that right are, at this moment, heading in opposite directions. But all of that is still the policy picture. Here is what it actually means at the level of the household that receives the letter. More than 80,000 Ukrainians remain in Ireland from the 126,000 who arrived since the start of the war. The vast majority are women and children. The demographic breakdown from available data shows that working-age women between 30 and 45 make up a disproportionate share of the adult population. Many are employed. Many have children enrolled in Irish schools. Many have built the kind of embedded community presence, a job, a school, a GP, a network, that the state's integration programs were explicitly designed to create. The integration worked. That is the counterintuitive part of this story. The problem is not that Ukrainians failed to integrate into Irish life. The problem is that the housing infrastructure to support that integration in the private market was never built. The barriers to employment for Ukrainian women, lack of affordable childcare, car dependency in rural areas, limited public transport, were documented by researchers and largely unaddressed. The integration succeeded at the human level. It was not matched at the structural level. Ireland sent a message in February 2022. It said, "Come here, you are welcome, we will help." 126,000 people came. 80,000 stayed, built lives, put children in schools. Now the message is changing. The new message is, the welcome has a budget line, and the budget line is closing. 27 seats at the European Union table. Ireland has one of them. The EU Temporary Protection Directive that gave Ukrainians the right to be here. Ireland voted for it. The extension to March 2027. Ireland supported it. The legal architecture says these people have the right to remain. The housing architecture says there is nowhere for them to go. That is not a contradiction that resolves itself quietly. It resolves itself in emergency accommodation applications, in school disruption, in workforce gaps in the sectors, healthcare, hospitality, construction, where Ukrainian workers have become embedded. and it resolves itself in further pressure on a rental market that was already, by every available measure, broken before any of this began. The Irish state is not evicting anyone. The legal position is clear, and Ukrainians retain their status and their right to remain. What the state is doing is withdrawing the scaffolding that made that right exercisable in practice, and doing so on a timeline that does not match the availability of alternatives. Here is what to watch in the coming weeks. The public consultation on transition safeguards, eligibility criteria, legal advice, appeals, is expected to open in May. That consultation will determine whether the wind down is managed or whether it becomes a crisis. The voluntary return scheme needs cabinet approval and detailed costings before it can be offered. The Accommodation Recognition Payment reduction from €600 to €400 has no confirmed implementation date as of now, though the direction is stated. The war that caused all of this is still running. The displacement it created is still live. And a state that spent €3.4 billion on a response is now drawing up the paperwork to close the file, in a housing market that was not built to absorb the consequences. The foundation was always cracking under this story. What is changing now is that the cracks are becoming visible to everyone at once.